The water was 28 degrees. Salt water freezes at a lower temperature than fresh water, which means the Atlantic Ocean that night was actually colder than solid ice. At that temperature, a human being lasts about 15 minutes before unconsciousness sets in. We know the numbers. 1,500 people died. 700 survived. We know about the Unsinkable Molly Brown. We know about the band that played until the end. But amidst the screaming, the steam, and the chaos, there was another tragedy playing out. One that history books usually skip over. There were 12 dogs on board the Titanic. They were the pampered pets of the richest people on Earth. They had their own kennels. They had their own daily parade on the deck. But when the lifeboat started lowering, the rule of the sea was absolute. Women and children first. There was no rule for man's best friend. Of the 12 dogs, only 3 made it to New York alive. 9 were left behind to face the dark water. And one owner, a woman named Ann Isham, made a choice that night that still haunts historians. She looked at the lifeboat, then looked at her dog, and decided that if he couldn't go, she wouldn't go either. In the next 15 minutes, we are going to track the final hours of these 12 animals. We'll uncover the specific mistake the crew made that doomed the large breeds, the secret way the small dogs were smuggled out, and the hero dog legend that might be a total lie. If you love history's hidden side, hit that subscribe button right now. We dig up the stories the textbooks left out. To understand why these dogs died, you have to understand how they lived. 1912 was the peak of the Gilded Age. For the first-class passengers, a dog wasn't just a pet. It was a status symbol. An accessory. Even the captain, Edward Smith, was a massive dog lover. He was famous for his Russian wolfhound, named Ben. And here is the first twist of fate. Ben was actually supposed to be on the Titanic. But at the very last second, before the ship left Southampton, Captain Smith gave the dog to his daughter to watch at home. Ben missed the boat. He was the lucky one. For the dogs that did board, the accommodations were better than most human houses. They were kept in the F-deck kennels. This wasn't a dark cargo hold. It was a state-of-the-art facility with central heating. The ship's carpenter, a man named John Hutchinson, was assigned to be their personal walker. Every day, he would take them up to the poop deck for exercise. And the price? To bring a dog on the Titanic cost the equivalent of about $3,000 today. They were planning a dog show for the morning of April 15th. The passengers were going to judge the best coat, the best posture. Of course, that show never happened. Among them was Gamin de Picombe, a champion French bulldog. There was a Chow Chow. There was an Airedale Terrier named Kitty, owned by the richest man on the ship, John Jacob Astor IV. They were safe, warm, and loved. Until 11:40 p.m. When the iceberg tore through the hull, the dogs were locked in their kennels on F-deck. But, not all of them. And this is the specific detail that decided who lived and who died. The very wealthy passengers often bribed the stewards to look the other way, allowing them to keep toy dogs in their cabins. When the alarm sounded, Henry Sleeper Harper, of the Harper Publishing family, was in his suite with his Pekingese, named Sun Yat Senator Henry grabbed his wife, and he grabbed the dog. When they reached lifeboat number 3, it was chaos. But Henry was a calm man. He stepped into the boat, holding the tiny Pekingese in his arms. The officer in charge, who was focused on loading people, looked at the dog. Sun Yat Sen was small. Quiet. He didn't take up a seat. The officer said nothing. The boat lowered. Sun Yat Sen survived because he was small enough to be invisible. The same miracle happened for Margaret Hayes. She had a Pomeranian named Lady. Margaret didn't ask for permission. She wrapped Lady in a thick blanket. To the panicked crew, it just looked like a woman clutching a bundle of clothes to stay warm. She stepped onto lifeboat 7. Lady didn't make a sound. I want to ask you a question. If you were standing on that deck, and an officer told you, no dogs, would you try to smuggle them under your coat? Or would you follow orders? Let me know in the comments. But for the owners of the larger dogs, there was no place to hide. Remember Gamin, the French bulldog? He was in the cabin with his owner. But a bulldog is heavy. You can't hide it in a blanket. When the stewards forced the owner into a lifeboat, Gamin was left behind in the room. The door was closed. The last thing his owner saw was the dog pacing the carpet, confused why he wasn't invited for the walk. This brings us to the most heartbreaking story of the night. The story of Ann Isham. Ann was 50 years old. She was traveling alone to Paris to spend the summer with her sister. She didn't have a husband or children with her. But she had her dog. Records are fuzzy on the dog's name, but we know it was a Great Dane. A massive, loyal giant. And made it to the lifeboats. She was a woman in first class. By the rules of the sea, she had a guaranteed seat. She was safe. She had her dog on a leash next to her. When she tried to step forward, the officer put out a hand. You can go, ma'am. The dog stays. A Great Dane takes up the space of a human. There was simply no room. And looked at the freezing black water. Then she looked at the boat. She knew that if she got in, her dog would be left alone on the tilting deck, terrified, waiting to drown. So, Ann Isham stepped back. She let someone else take her seat on the lifeboat. Witnesses say she turned around and walked back toward the stern of the ship, her hand resting on the dog's head. She chose to die, rather than break her promise to her pet. Days later, the recovery ship Mackay Bennett was sweeping the area for bodies. They found a woman floating in the water. Her arms were frozen around the neck of a large dog. She held on to him until the very end. Back on the ship, the water was rising toward F deck. The dogs locked in the kennels were barking frantically. They could sense the vibrations of the ship breaking apart. Someone, history isn't sure who, maybe John Jacob Astor himself, decided to do one final act of mercy. They ran down to F deck and threw the kennel doors open. Go! In the final moments of the Titanic, the deck was swarming with dogs. An Airedale Terrier. A Fox Terrier. A King Charles Spaniel. They ran up and down the sloping deck, confused, looking for their masters. This chaos birthed a legend. Maybe you've heard of Rigel. Newspapers later reported that a massive black Newfoundland dog named Rigel swam in the water for 3 hours, barking to guide the rescue ship Carpathia to the survivors. It is a beautiful story. It makes us feel better. But, it's not true. There is no record of a Rigel on the manifest. No survivors mentioned a barking dog in the water. It was likely a myth invented by a reporter to give people hope in a hopeless story. The cold truth is, once the ship went under, the freezing Atlantic claimed them all. None of the kennel dogs survived. Of the 12, only 3 made it to New York. Sun Yat Sen, Lady, and another unnamed Pomeranian. 2 Poms and a Peak. The survival of the smallest. The aftermath was cold and bureaucratic. The owner of the French bulldog, Gamin, later filed an insurance claim for his death. He asked for £750. But Ann Isham's family never filed a claim. Some bonds are worth more than the payout. These dogs were the silent victims of history. But as long as we tell their story, they aren't entirely lost. Have you heard this story before? Comment your thoughts if you are a dog lover. Like, subscribe and share. This helps us create more videos like this.